This is Remote Ruby.
Have you any remote idea to the meaning of the word?
Chris.
Hey, welcome back. We didn't record last week. We'll still have an episode out, but it feels like it's been a long time. And Jason didn't make it last week or this week. It's been a strange month.
It has been a weird month. And we kind of almost sort of recorded last week, but it was kind of like we talked for, I think, 15 minutes, and then you had a visitor and I ate Chipotle for the rest of the call.
Which then Jason sent that recording to our podcast editor. I was like, probably don't need to edit that one. Last week's situation was, so I bought this car in 2019, still hadn't transferred the title, but I have to have the Missouri State Police come to my house to look at the car. He comes out and then he's like, I need to go get this document notarized before I can do anything, which wasn't actually in the instructions. He misread them. So then I had to have him come out again. And then what happened? Oh, he wrote down the wrong thing. So if he checks the box that it's a damaged car, then they consider that like a car in an accident that was salvage. And they were like, you have to write non-operational on there. So the second time he comes out, we forget to do that. So I go to the DMV after wasting 20 hours on this already. They're like, yep, can't do anything. And here's a new piece of paper. Go talk to him again. So after 25 phone calls or something, I got the paperwork filled out, went to the DMV, and I finally officially own the car that I've actually owned for almost 2 years now that still doesn't drive. So it's wonderful. I love it.
The police having to come to your house is the non-starter for me. I'm just like, nah. Not because I'm doing anything illegal, but if I were and didn't want them to know about it,
Yeah, you're like, you have to question everything that you do. You're like, did I do this wrong? Are they going to write a citation up? Originally, it was like the DMV told me that I have to have safety inspections and stuff. And I was like, well, my taillights don't work because the wiring harness is melted. So do I buy a new harness? And it's like a really old car, so they don't really make harnesses anymore. And so I never ended up buying something. And then I could, if I had a trailer with a winch, but I don't have a trailer with a winch to go take to an inspection station. And then finally found on the website that whole, you can have an officer come out. But then that was call local police, which refers me to your address is in this other jurisdiction. And they're like, we'll transfer you. That jurisdiction says they don't do house calls. And oh my gosh, I'm so glad to have that over. I should have the title in the mail in the next couple of weeks, and the car can continue to sit in my ownership, which is great.
There we go. Before we get into our main topic, funny story. I was having some testing discrepancies on staging and locally, which I have not had in a long time, especially since we use Docker for most things, but this specific app is not. So Rails has a redirect back method. And so in my controller, I'm doing if update, else redirect back, and then you can give it a fallback location. So if you can't redirect back, redirect to this fallback location. And I like doing that more than the render edit thing, because then you can't get your Flash to show up. That's a non-starter. Well, you can, just not the way I think most people wanted to show up. But because of this redirect fallback, my tests were assert, redirected to, and then the fallback location. And for some reason in Circle CI, it had a different fallback location. And I tried a few things to figure it out, and I got annoyed. And so I kind of just looked both ways and then changed it to just assert redirected or whatever that is, assert response redirected, and then squashed all the commits, pushed it up. No one said anything. We're good to go.
Yeah, well, sometimes you just need to get those tests to pass.
Yeah, there's no reason for it to fail, but whatever. This is my fun tip, redirect back. I always forget about it, but it's pretty slick.
Yeah, it uses the refer header to do that redirect back, which is handy.
But it's an optional header, so you got to make sure that there can be browser things going on with that. But if that request header is missing, that's when it will use the fallback location, and it can take you all the way back. So it's pretty slick. I like it a lot better than I like, render, edit, render new thing. I don't like that. I can't explain why. I just don't.
The biggest problem with that until Hotwire fixed it. So the situation of you go to new or you go to edit and your validations fail, those change the URL to like /posts instead of /post/new. And you have the error then, which is fine, but the URL changed, which means you can't refresh the page because it's going to redo that post request, which is not kosher. It's like fine in the browser, but not on mobile. Absolutely not on mobile. That's weird. It's weird enough in the browser anyways. So now that Hotwire does the Ajax posts for your forms, you stay on post/new. And if you render edit, you stay on there, or the redirect back will do the same thing. You're going to stay on that same URL that you were just on, which is so nice to have fixed after, what is it, like 5 years or whatever that we've been dealing with that in TurboLinks, or I guess just in Rails. I think that's the way scaffolds have always worked. So,
yeah,
a little JavaScript required, I guess, to fix that, but that is super nice. And then redirect back will do basically the same thing. The reason why they have the render edit or the render new is to persist that instance variable so you don't lose your data in your form. But if you don't need that or whatever,
right,
that's okay. So,
nah, screw the users. Speaking of Hotwire, and we can talk about this another time, but what I've almost got working is a turbo stream on my Bridgetown site that uses Vercel's serverless functions to return the HTML.
Nice. That is pretty cool.
So we'll talk about it another time. Today, we're here to talk about Leftpad.
MIME types?
Oh, yeah. That's our Leftpad.
Yeah, right. How long ago was Leftpad? That feels like it was a couple years ago.
Leftpad was in 2016.
Wow. That was a long time ago. Huh.
Right. I mean, and that started like a whole bunch of other interesting conversations. If I remember correctly, Ruby Gems didn't make that many they was discussed, and I don't think anything really changed because one of the things that they wanted to do was to prevent yanking. And I think NPM does do that now, right? I don't think you can yank.
That's a good question. And, we should take a step back and explain the Leftpad situation. If you want to go dive into that.
Sure, I'll do it. So Leftpad is a NPM package, and basically all it does is add a little bit of padding to the left part of a string, like as the name kind of implies. So you can take like Leftpad and then pass it foo as a string and then 5, and it will return a string with 5 spaces and then foo. So super, super simple. And I'm like, why you like this, JavaScript? Because in Ruby, we have stuff like this built in. Yeah. We're over here building skyscrapers and stuff. But basically what happened was the maintainer of this little package, he had another package, and I can't remember the exact name of it, but it conflicted with the name of a company. So like this company claimed copyright on that name, and NPM didn't like back him up, and he got pissed off and threw a temper tantrum. He threw a temper tantrum, and he yanked every single package that he had created off of NPM, which was a lot. The problem is that React is the big one that like I always immediately think of, but this package was depended upon by a lot of projects. And when he yanked all of them, they were gone. No one could ship JavaScript anymore. JavaScript was over. The other tangential issue that happened, which didn't end up being a problem this time, was that NPM allows you, allowed you to, if a name was yanked, you could re-upload or claim that name basically. So what some user did was he took all of the packages the guy had yanked, he re-uploaded them as his own new packages to basically save everyone's build. The problem with that is, I mean, we have automatic dependency updates are pretty popular, I think, in JavaScript. Someone could have shipped a Bitcoin miner right there. That's an extreme security flaw, especially if you can re-release under the same version. Then you run yarn install on your CI or locally, and then suddenly the hackers are in the network. It was a lot of drama, it was a lot of controversy, but then it kind of spread out to other packages, Ruby and PHP, and we're like, well, what are we going to do if this happens? And it happened.
Yeah, it took 4 or 5 years, but It happened.
Yeah.
While you were talking, I did pull up the NPM unpublished policy. And if you publish something less than 72 hours ago, you can unpublish.
Mhm.
And if it was more than 72, you can unpublish if no other packages depend on it, if it had less than 300 downloads over the last week, and if it has a single owner or maintainer. So pretty strict.
Well, yeah, which will help the users, but there's also, you could get screwed for that, especially in an instance like MimeType or MimeMagic, where it's a licensing issue. Because if you have a licensing issue, now you, the maintainer, could be sued. And I don't know about you, but if someone emails me or opens issue on one of my packages and they're like, hey, you're using this licensed thing, you got to do something about this or we're going to take your ass to court, that package is going by. Like I'm going to cover my ass. And I feel like everyone can understand, what are we going to do here? I'm not trying to get sued over an open source package.
It's interesting because like I totally would feel the same way, but it was just the one version that was yanked, the most recent one or something. It wasn't
they
like
all were yanked.
Every version of it.
Yeah.
Right?
They all got yanked.
Okay.
Because I think any version with that, well, I guess we could check Ruby gems. What I understood from reading the issues was that, because if you think about it, I mean, that's correct. I had this issue once where I accidentally re-released some code that was GPL under MIT, and I yanked all the packages as well. The problem is, like, as long as a distribution of that package exists with that copyrighted code, it's a copyright infringement.
Yep. Yeah, I was going to say you would have to pull all of those because you can just pull the latest version. You'd have to do everything because they all are on the same license. So yeah,
and they are all
that
yanked.
was rough.
I'm looking here.
Yeah, I pulled that up too because I think all I saw was like everybody saying 0.35 wasn't available anymore or whatever, which is like the latest version at the time or whatever it was.
I think that was the version that Rails depended on.
Yeah, it was the latest version that everybody was using. Because I wasn't really working too much yesterday when this fiasco went down. I saw it on Twitter and stuff, and I was like, oh boy, this is wonderful.
Yeah.
So what ended up happening with this, because there's a new version of 0.3, really like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 versions of it were published in the last day or whatever. So all of those are new license for it.
So I'll try to do my best. My understanding and what I've read is that what this code was, that I think it was just a list of the MIME types, and they had pulled it from another package that was under a GPL license. A GPL license is more restrictive than MIT. And one of the caveats of it is, and I had sent you all this in Slack earlier, and this is on when you're reading like about the GPL, it says, for example, if you distribute copies of such a program whether it's paid or free, you must give the recipients all the rights that you have. You must make sure that they too receive or can get the source code. And they also have to know that these terms exist and that they have that right. So what this really means is that now Rails depends on a GPL package. That makes Rails a GPL. That makes anything that uses Rails GPL. And that makes everyone who's ever built a Rails app, your source code now would have to be public, which is obviously a non-starter. Right. That's obviously out of the question, you know?
Yeah.
The person who owned the package that claimed the copyright, it was a chill conversation. Basically, it was like, hey, you need to re-release this under GPL. And he also offered another solution that they could do. So I didn't take that issue. It was not like a malicious thing. It didn't appear as like someone, I mean, we all know if you have trademark or copyright, you have to protect that. Or if you ever do need to protect it in court, they're going to use all the instances that you didn't protect it as a basis for using it.
Yep. Which is why you see lawyers being a little bit overly ambitious with protecting Apple or whatever. They just have to. That's part of the law, basically.
Right. But so like I already said, MimeMagic is a Rails dependency. So when all those versions got yanked, all versions of Rails that depended on that version were now broken completely. And what the user did is they re-released the package under GPL. But that's a major bump. Even though they're not doing true semantic versioning, they're doing point releases, but that's a bump release. And so they did that. And a lot of people were like, hey, look, all of our apps are trying to use the 0.36 version. Can you re-release under 0.36? And the problem with that is now you're re-releasing GPL code under a version that was previously MIT. Now everyone's going to have GPL in their code base if this happens. So what ended up actually happening is Rails was like, okay, we may use something different. And what ended up happening for MimeMagic is the maintainer archived the project, which I think I was like, bro, WTF. But at the same time, I was like, dude, I feel that, like when everything hits the fan on a project that you really don't care about, like this project has been going since 2009. Like it gets very minor changes throughout the years. I would also be like, F it, but that's not going to work. So someone in the Rails community, I should have pulled up their name, but they were like, I'll take under maintainership. Shout out that person. But we still have this GPL issue. So the solution was you have to use a system dependency that I don't remember the name of, but brew install or apt-get, so that it doesn't have to use that GPL code. Now it's to use a system dependency to get a list of all the available MIME types, which is also a pain in the ass because now you have to brew install or you have to change all your Docker configurations and like this and that. And yeah, it was just a kerfuffle. So several versions got changed. People got angry and pissy. Twitter obviously had an opinion.
So like basically the fix for the GPL thing was we can keep it under MIT as long as like it's your responsibility to install this GPL database. It can run on your operating system and we can access it, but the library itself doesn't have to be GPL because it's not including that.
Well, I don't think that package is GPL that they're using now. I think like they were...
I'm not sure. It's a freedesktop.org. It's the same database, I think, is what they were using, but it's not included anymore.
Though. Right.
Because it's not included, it's no longer like a dependency of that. So it comes with Debian or Ubuntu, or you can install it with Homebrew. You can install it, but it's no longer like included in your stuff or whatever. So I think that allows them to fix that. But then, of course, now they're like, you got to go figure out how to get this installed. And everybody's system for doing that is going to be different. It's now an extra step you have to do. And that's just makes it a huge pain, which this like thing that was just running happily for years now is a nightmare to maintain. I feel terrible for them having to deal with that. And it's got to happen because it's a license issue that would be, you just don't want to have to deal with that. And you're building open source stuff for free. Like you don't want to have to pay for a lawyer to protect you and stuff. That's scary stuff.
Especially for a list, bro. We're talking about a list. I mean, come on.
Yeah. It's really just like a list of, here's all these weird exceptions for these file types and detecting them properly.
And the also thing that you kind of hinted at but didn't explicitly say is that now there's another barrier to getting Rails running.
Yes.
So the Rails maintainers were like, we're looking at using something else. We're looking into finding a replacement or something. Someone did take over maintainership of MimeMagic. Again, shout out that person whose name I didn't write down. I'm sure they are having an awful time right now because I read like a tweet from them. They're like, I've been working on this for 2 days now. Like, oof. So, I mean, just a general pain. But I think it looks like Rails is not intending to keep using this library, but it needs to stay for a legacy.
Yeah. Did you see that 10 minutes before we started recording, they released a new version of Rails?
I did not see that.
So the hierarchy is like active storage is using Marcel from Basecamp, which depends on MimeMagic for basically getting the correct MIME types for the files you're uploading. So they've gone and updated Marcel to drop the MimeMagic dependency in Rails. So that's an awesome improvement. What they've done, it appears, is use the Apache license for this, and they can actually include Apache Tika MIME types data. They can include that very similar to the way that MimeMagic was doing, but with a different database and use a different license that is compatible with MIT. So we can have that with one less dependency, I guess. And that should improve things quite a bit. But yeah, they're not going to be able to like go back and change. Well, if it's a loose-ish dependency on Marcel for older versions of Rails, then that'll be something that those apps can update to, which is good. But there may be some that are tied specifically to MimeMagic that they will need that compatible version. So you may have to go through those hoops on older apps, but it does look like Rails and Marcel and active storage and everything are safe to use now for that. Yeah, what a fiasco. To understand the scale of what's going on right now, that MimeMagic gem has 110 million downloads. So like, this is a giant dependency because, yeah, basically all these Rails apps and everything are using this as a dependency through active storage or other things. And who knows? I don't know if Carrier Wave or Shrine or Paperclip or whatever, they might use that too. They are probably going to use something like this to be accurate with their MIME types for file uploads. But yeah, that is 110 million downloads. Can you believe that? So now imagine you're the developer of this thing that you're just like kind of maintaining because you have to now and you don't really care about it. And then 110 million downloads worth of developers and stuff come yelling at you, screaming. And I'm sure there was not constructive conversation a lot of times. I can understand that like archive button.
That's what I said in the very beginning. I totally sympathize with homie. Jon Wood is the name of the individual who took over maintainership. Shout out, John, you rock. Also, to add a little bit more to what you just said, on GitHub, there are almost 600,000 public open repositories that depend on this project and over 172 GitHub packages. And that's just GitHub. That's just open. And I'm talking like they've got IBM stuff in here. Like IBM has a package that relies on it. Like all sorts of, like, it looks like GitHub does as well. Here's Rails Marcel and just, oh my God, just a giant cluster.
That's nuts.
Thoughtbot relies on it.
Wow.
Oof.
Yeah, I guess they released 1.0 of Marcel up from 0.3.3, and that was last released in 2018. So yeah, I guess probably all those old apps are not going to be able to upgrade to 1.0 because that'll be like a conflicting dependency in Rails. So yeah, that's fun. And that's, I guess, why they had to do that bug fix or whatever release. What do you call that fourth digit in the version? Because it's major, minor, bug fix, and
it's
hot
like
fix
pre,
or something.
I think it's called like pre, or I don't know. It indicates like whether something's like a next release or a pre-release or something like that. I don't know the actual name for it. I know you're talking about that. Yeah,
because usually that's like beta, alpha.
Right.
You know, they use it as like a hot fix kind of number.
It's like a pre-version number or something. I don't know. I'm going to stop trying to guess at what it's called.
Yeah. But that's a crazy situation.
Yeah.
All from a very trivial, easy mistake to make, you know, like it wouldn't be hard to mess that up.
No. And the problem is that licenses are hard. Most of us are not lawyers, AKA most of us really don't understand the thing. I think once everyone was like, hey, if you use this, your code has to be open source. Everyone was like, hold up.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, this is the reason why everything you see typically is, at least in the Rails world, is MIT. It is allowing for closed source usage. And GPL is good for things that must be purely open source, which is why you don't see it used unless it's fully open source. That's the point of the license.
CodeFund was GPL because our code was open source, but we wanted some of the protections that GPL had. Here's my thing though. I guarantee you, if you, dear listener, aren't currently suffering from this, I guarantee you may have in the past. There are totally GPL packages that you may have in your app and not know about. And there are tools that can help you find them. Most people don't give it a second thought until there's an issue.
Yeah. I thought you were going to go into a hair loss commercial all of a sudden.
No.
With that. The way you started that was just, dear listeners, you may not know this, but
I've been listening to Jason Sweat's podcast and he says dear listeners a lot. Hey, Jason. Fortunately, well, you said you weren't really doing much, and like, unless GoRails had issue, I didn't have any issues somehow. Maybe just the versions of Rails that we're using.
Yeah, if you bundle update now, you'll be fine.
Right.
So
And we don't use active storage or action mailbox or whatever.
Last night I was fiddling with, I had to fix a couple tests and things because building noticed or pay or whatever other gems that depend on Rails, they're going to install MimeMagic as one of those nested dependencies, and so that was one that I did notice last night. Or like, oh, it's on 0.35. That doesn't exist anymore. You need to update that. It's for my test suite. It's not an actual dependency of my gem. So, or it's like a sub dependency or whatever. And so, yeah, but it is quite the week for the Rails community. There's the occasional like AWS is down showstoppers, but there's not usually a dependency breaking everything or a ship stuck in the middle of a canal.
It's the perfect week. Everything is stuck from shipping.
Yeah. Literal shipping and coding shipping.
Yeah. I was going to say something. I totally forgot. It was actually insightful. There it goes. It's gone forever.
That's probably why you forgot.
Yeah. Oh, well.
I was on George's Twitter account and he tweeted the other day he got the vaccine. And then he replied to the tweet and said, least important thing, but the scheduling portal is a Rails app, which I thought was awesome. So
nice.
That's pretty cool to see that Rails gets used for all these things that you never even know. It's just like magically working in the background under the GPL.
Under the GPL.
Chris, you know what really just bugs me?
It seems like it's on the tip of my tongue.
Bugs.
Oh, dang it. I knew it.
All bugs.
Of course.
Real bugs, bugs in my app, Bugs Bunny, anything with a bug in it bugs me.
I can see why.
So I'm asking Chris for your professional opinion as a thought leader in the industry. How should I handle these bugs?
I learned in school that honey badgers are really good with bug problems.
Do you mean a literal honey badger?
Or maybe honeybadger.io.
But if I sign up for Honey Badger, what do I get? Well,
something that is really useful that actually just saved my butt the other day was their uptime monitoring. I was doing an update on one of my apps and made a deploy and didn't notice right away that it went down. So that was a really good, useful feature there. Not to mention that they've got your error monitoring for those bugs. Yeah. You should go check out Honey Badger, it sounds like.
Sounds like it. See you, Chris.
Okay, I remember what I was going to say. I've had this conversation in the past with a few people about vendor gems because it's not default on, where basically anytime you update gems, they're all stored in your vendor cache inside of your application. So it downloads a copy of all of those gems, sticks in your vendor cache. There's pros and cons. Some people don't like it because it makes the app a lot bigger in terms of like actual file size, and it can decrease deploy times because of the size of the application. I've always done it specifically because someone else told me I should do it, and I just did it, and it was just the way it was. But this is like a great example. I was talking to Mike Rogers and a while back, and he was like, "Why would you do this? And why would you add the vendor cache?" And I was like, hey, think about what if we had a Leftpad incident? If you have your vendor cache, then you're set. All you have to do is you can set the vendor path in your gem file and basically say, hey, load this gem from my vendor path. You've already got it there. As long as you don't bundle update, it will still be there. And then you're good to go. But the problem, I guess, there is then you're shipping GPL code.
Right.
That is a way, if you're like one of those companies is like, I don't give a crap when it bites up to us, it'll bite up to us. For right now, we got to go. If you had your vendor cache on and you were doing that, then you were good to go. So +1 for vendor cache.
Yeah, I can see that being useful in some cases. Most of the time, you're going to want the latest version of a gem or something. And it's just nice to be able to install that system wide. And plus, you can share those. If you have 20 Rails apps that you create a week for making screencasts like I do, you don't want to have 20 copies of the same gem for every one of those.
Right.
But it does make a lot of sense. You reminded me of like the situation I was dealing with legacy code when I first started Rails. Like my first Rails app to set up this was even pre-bundler, which was part of the problem. But
the before
we
times.
had the I think it was like config.application or config application RB, something like that, had like config.gem line. So very similar to the gem line that you have in your bundler setups with your gem files, but it was inside your Rails code. And if I remember right, somebody just didn't put version numbers in there. And the code is actually tied to an older version. So, again, you put your version requirements in your gem lines always. But that would have been one where it's legacy code. If we vendor our gems, then we always know that's going to work. And then on top of that, as you're dealing with legacy stuff, you either have to update to the latest version of that gem or a newer version of it, which isn't necessarily going to be what you want, because sometimes they're going to be we added Ruby 2.5, 2.6, 2.7 compatibility, but we also changed all this other crap. We didn't just change the gem to work with the newer Ruby versions and syntax and stuff. We actually refactored all this stuff and it doesn't work the same way and there are other breaking changes. It can be useful to vendor your gems and then just maintain them yourself so that you have a process that you can apply to literally all of your dependencies, because maybe you want to just update that to work the exact same way it does, just with the newer Ruby version or whatever.
Right.
So you could also use it.
You could use it as a substitute to forking and then releasing your own private gem. I wouldn't recommend doing that, but you could.
It depends on the application and how painful the upgrade is. That's what GitHub did, and they're trying to get away from it. They were forked Rails and all this stuff and ended up with a very painful custom thing. But Eileen and the team have gone back the complete opposite direction and now run the latest Rails in GitHub in production. And it's an epic amount of work that they've done, but some of that legacy stuff may need that just to get by for as you do the upgrades to take some time.
Yeah, I should clarify. Anyway. I'm totally down with forking. Do it all the time. I'm a forker. What I meant is if you have this issue where you're okay, I need to change something in this gem, I would recommend forking and using a private gem versus changing it in your vendor cache and just relying on that.
Yep. You're not going to remember those changes that you made.
No, you're absolutely not. And if it's not you bring on a new person, they don't know, you leave the team. There's a whole host of issues. But don't fork every gem, people. Come on. I worked on an app that, come on. Really?
Yeah, at that point, you maintain all of that work now.
Yeah, we might as well just write all these gems.
Yeah.
I have thoughts and feelings.
It makes it rough. Yep. Well, got my RailsConf talk finished finally. That was, a RailsConf talk takes a lot of time. I spent probably 40 hours working on that. And it ended up being 45 minutes long, but I'm excited for that to finally go live. That was a very big distraction, but I think it's pretty cool to be able to do that. Looks like this year's schedule is going to be a lot better than last year. We have the speakers have a Q&A sort of, I think it's a half an hour long in Discord for answering questions and stuff. And I think it's just the keynotes that are being live streamed and everything else is kind of watch on your own. But
really? Interesting.
Yeah, if that's what
RubyConf was all live, but you had the option, I think, if you didn't want, I think you had the option as a speaker, but I think most of them were live. So that's interesting.
Yeah. See, it says here at the top, this year only keynotes will be live. All other talks will be available to watch on demand whenever you'd like and once the conference begins. So it looks like DHH and Evan Phoenix will be on day one, and then some breaks and a job. Yeah. I don't know what the job fair is, and then the Q&A session, and then 4 hours later or something is the closing keynote. It'll be kind of interesting to see, and it's also the opposite time of what you would do in person. So this is Eastern time. It starts at 1 p.m. So it's globally available time, or as best as it can be, which is kind of cool. So, hopefully there will be a lot more people able to watch and join in. So I'm curious to see
how the workshops are going to go.
Yeah, I was wondering about that too. I don't know if they're going to be live streamed or what. So that'll be interesting. Yeah.
That will be interesting. Oh, these are I
think they're doing a good job on it. There's a lot of good stuff in there this year. They've definitely had a year to figure out how to deal with a remote conference, which is a whole other thing than an in-person conference. Props to everybody that's organizing RailsConf this year.
Yeah, for sure. I got a little peek into the process when my first year learning Rails, like RailsConf came around. I was like, oh, I'd love to go. My team was like, it's kind of expensive to send an intern to this, like in Pittsburgh, like hours away, and blah blah blah. So I actually volunteered as a volunteer at RailsConf, which gave me a free ticket. And then my company was like, hey, cool, we'll pay for your room and board if you get yourself there. So I drove with 3 buddies, but I got like kind of like an insight into what was going on behind the scenes. It's a ton of work. And it's one of those situations where like, as soon as RailsConf ends, they're already planning next year because the venue stuff, like they're already like looking for places. They're like planning site tours or whatever. It's a lot of work. It's an ongoing throughout the year process. So thank you to everyone who works on this Ruby Central. And we should and need to support them because these programs are vital, I think, to our community.
They are. They really are. I mean, it's a lot of the sponsors are sponsoring because they're hiring and stuff, but you need people to know that there's lots of jobs available. You need the community to meet each other and become friends and support each other. And it's just like a whole ecosystem. And I feel like RailsConf and RubyConf are where all of that converges. I don't know what happened with all the like regional conferences, but those were, really valuable. That's where I got into going to conferences was Ruby Midwest and all the little ones. Ruby on Rails was my favorite. That was a blast. I think the bar opened at 9 a.m. for that conference. So you can imagine that it got pretty rowdy by the end of day 2. Yeah, like that is the core of how the community really gets together and meets everyone. And it's just a blast. So I cannot wait until it's back in person. I don't really care about the talks. I want to go hang out. That's where we met. And actually I met Jason because he was going to RailsConf in Kansas City and I wasn't, but I just drove out there to meet him. That has been such an important piece of the Ruby and Rails community and careers for people. And
there are right now, I know the regional conferences were definitely winding down by the time I joined, but right now there's a ton of Ruby meetups actually happening, but a lot of them are not US based, which like obviously I don't care either way because of the fact that they're virtual, anyone can join. So Ruby, Rug RB, I'm not going to even try to name them all because I'm going to get them all wrong, but I'm speaking in one soon.
Cool.
In June or April. I should know that, but I'm speaking at one. So things like that are going on if these are things that you are interested in. So you're doing a Q&A on day 2 or 3?
I think
3, 4 o'clock?
Day 3, yes.
4:10. So that's where everyone can come ask you their burning questions about how cool is Jason? Is he as cool as we think? Shampoo, what kind of shampoo you use, things like that.
Right before our beloved Aaron Patterson's hilarious keynote, as it always is. He's one of the best. I love his talks.
Yeah, I have been to the past 2 in-person ones I've been to. Hilarious.
Half the talk is just ridiculous stuff. And then eventually it like somehow transitions into like some really deep Rails knowledge.
Right.
And you're like, what? How did we get from here to there?
I always like it because it's always really funny. I love comedy. I joke that like if I wasn't writing Rails, I would try to be like a stand-up comedian, but you know how well that usually works out for people. But yeah, I like that aspect a lot. The other interesting thing is when you made me think about this is with Ruby on Rails is like, now that I don't drink, I'm wondering like how conferences are going to be for me. I know there are non-drinkers who are like, oh, I don't want to be around anything non-drinking, and which I understand if, have had alcoholism issues and like you just can't be around it. I definitely have had alcoholism issues, but I'm at a point where I can be around it and it doesn't bother me, but it's still like, man.
Yeah, there's been a good balance when we've gone in the past. There's been quite a few people who don't drink. So if you don't, it's just like hanging out. There might be a couple of people who are a little louder.
Annoying.
But for the most part, I think it's got a nice balance, or there's always groups of people. It depends on which group that you're hanging out with too, but there's a nice, wonderful balance of people.
You made me think about that because I saw someone a while back. I don't remember who it was. They were pretty popular in their own sphere, being like, you should never serve alcohol at conferences because it alienates and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I don't agree with that necessarily. I don't think because I have a personal choice that everyone else should be affected. I don't know. I don't know why I thought about it. It's just interesting when we get back to in-person conferences, which should be soon.
Yeah. There's unfortunately a lot of interpersonal things that make conferences in person tough, lots of different personalities and things. So for everybody that's doing that work, and Jason's done so much of that in the past, like, I know it's exhausting and it doesn't get enough appreciation. I bet you that having been through a pandemic, a lot of people are going to be itching to get back out and see other human beings. So we might have like a wonderful revival of conferences and stuff in the next couple of years. That would be awesome because they were dying out for a little while. A lot of the regional ones had kind of closed up.
I wonder now that we've been through this, they might make a return. Because I could see that because I have friends who now are vaccinated. They're like, I'm going to go lick every phone pole and like, obviously joking. But like, I know there are people who are, I'm ready to get out there and get crazy. And like, please, people don't get crazy because the roads are getting a little scary. I don't know if have you seen this, but people are driving a little bit more erratically.
Somebody the other day was like, I miss the beginning of the pandemic when the roads were completely clear and everybody was watching Tiger King and baking bread at home.
Yeah. Now everyone's like angry.
Yeah. It feels very different from back then. We also have this sort of like revival of everything too. Ruby 3, Rails 7, which I don't know if they're going to make it. It's still alpha, but Rails 7 is slated for RailsConf.
I forgot about that.
Yeah. It just seems like maybe we'll get a beta or something by then, but they usually go through betas and then RCs and stuff. There's no way they can run this stuff out between now and then. It would have to be probably out already for any regressions and things. So we'll see what happens. And I also asked, I think Ross tweeted about Webpacker 6 and cool stuff coming out. And I asked, is that slated for the same time or whatever? So we'll be maybe a bunch of this cool stuff happening all at once. Who knows? Yeah. I'm excited to see it all, but there's a lot of new good stuff going on. And I think that'll be good for conferences making a comeback.
Sure. Well, self-plug, if you're looking at Webpacker 6, I wrote a comprehensive article about upgrading it, and you got to go through all the steps. And I actually tried it the other night with Colin. Colin and I were looking at Tailwind CSS JIT, and because he had tried to install it, and he was like, hey, I can't install it. And he had asked a question about Webpacker, and I was like, oh, this is a great opportunity for me to flex my Webpack knowledge. And we hopped on the call and we were talking about it. And I was like, let's go ahead and just try it. I spun up an app and it didn't work on normal, the version of Webpacker that comes with Rails because of post CSS 8. So immediately you can't use it without Webpacker 6. But we went through the process of upgrading in under a few minutes, upgraded it to Webpacker 6 based on the articles I'd written, got Tailwind CSS JIT working, just not with all the super cool features that they kind of tout in their video. We couldn't get all of that working. And there's a lot going on in the Tailwind CSS JIT issues, but we did get it running and compiling. So that was pretty cool. So
yeah, Matt Swanson and I did a tuple the other day, and because I think it was Tailwind 2.0 when that launched, I upgraded to Webpacker 6 without knowing that it was still very much in flux. I misunderstood the pre-release version because then they released another beta after that. And anyways, that was like, I didn't really want to run the post-CSS 7 build, but it's been a real pain in the butt because they've changed so much in Webpacker 6. But yeah, we got the JIT working with only like 1 or 2 changes, and it works really well. But we were having so in Jumpstart Pro, there's like a background Twitter. So like when you connect your Twitter account, that button has the Twitter color and such. But it was something like if you apply that, if you do like an add apply to another class, it wouldn't pick up that change or something. And
that's what I saw. The proxy.
And I didn't really understand. Yeah, and I didn't really understand the layers, the components layer and stuff. I didn't have anything under those layers. It was just kind of in order being required. And we didn't have to do any layers except for that one file. So that worked pretty well. It's lightning fast, which is great.
It is sick fast. Webpacker 6 alone is sick fast.
Did you guys run into the issue of the content hash being missing in Webpacker 6?
No.
The beautiful thing is the application.js doesn't include the SHA in the URL. So at some point, you're going to be editing your CSS and realize it's not changing in the browser. And you're going to have to disable your browser cache to make sure that it reloads those files, because that has weirdly been removed, I think on accident, as they refactored from version 5. But this is my trouble right now. We've went through this couple months of activity on Hotwire and Turbo and Webpacker and stuff. And now it's like stagnated again, where like the last PR that was merged in Turbo is February. And there's a lot of things that need fixing. And I'm hoping that someone will come through and just kind of go chew through all those and merge and fix these things, because it's almost there, but there's still some rough edges. So I'm thinking they're going to have to do that before Rails 7 drops, which if they can still do it by RailsConf, then that means next 3 weeks, we should see a lot of stuff going on, but I won't hold my breath.
Yeah. Well, I don't think I ran into that issue because I was doing JavaScript pack with chunks. So I was chunking. I did notice though that when I used the Tailwind CSS JIT, there was some caching going on and I had to literally clobber the file. Yep. Rails Webpacker clobber in order to get Rails to realize, so I think Rails is proxying through the Webpacker engine to the Webpack dev server. A lot of stuff has changed with that. I'm sure there's something that can get fixed. So
one of the things I really want to try too is Tailwind CSS Rails, and possibly look at using that and Stimulus Rails and just doing everything through the asset pipeline. Maybe leaving I don't know if you would do the action cable stuff still in the asset pipeline or Webpacker. But if that were the case, it would just be really interesting to move everything and not have all these Webpacker nonsense things going on. But it's one thing where I'm like, the benefit of that is I don't know how much more seamless it will be, if any. It may be worse. So I
predict it'll be worse.
That's my hunch too. So I've been like, maybe I'll try it one day if I'm feeling like it, but more if I want to just contribute to open source. Go test this out with a complex example and find some edge cases that you can contribute to or whatever.
Well, that has been Leftpad, the Ruby version.
Yeah.
Super fun.
That has been a week of all shipping halted.
Yeah. Well, I think if anything, what really stood out was shout out to all the people maintaining gems, especially if you're maintaining Rails gems. A lot of people came through. A lot of people stood up. Shout out to all of them. That's what makes our community awesome.
Yeah, it was impressive work from everybody involved. And I'm glad I just get to sit safely on the sidelines just watching the chaos happen.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we'll get Jason back next week. And I will talk to you
later. See ya.